speak now about the role of international law in all of this. Professor Hennie Strydom is a professor of public and international law at the University of Johannesburg. Professor Strydom, good evening to you and thank you for your time. For many years now, Israel has held the military upper hand. It's really been able to control events on the ground in Gaza and in Israel from a military point of view. Does that mean it can basically break international law, or does international law still apply here?
No, it applies very much so, and I think, you know, the leadership on both sides realize the importance of performing their functions, military or otherwise, within the confines of the law and including within the confines of international humanitarian law. So that is clear. I mean, the protection of civilians, the non-targeting of civilians, the provision of humanitarian aid, all that are sort of common principles that all parties involved in hostilities must comply with.
So presumably then, the way in which Israel has treated people in Gaza in the last 3 weeks would be illegal, and the way that Hamas killed Israeli civilians 17 days ago would be illegal too.
Yeah, I think if we can sort of make an assessment on the basis of information we have, there may be several cases on both sides where there's been a violation of international humanitarian law, and which may, we hope, eventually will be further investigated and hopefully will also lead to proper accountability for the violations.
As I understand it, Israel is not a member of the International Criminal Court, but Palestine is. So what does that mean then for the situation in Gaza? This is, as I understand it, part of Palestine, but it's Israeli actions across the border from Israel into Palestine. Does that mean that the International Criminal Court doesn't really have jurisdiction, or does it mean that it does?
No, the Rome Statute applies in Palestine and in Gaza as well, so that has been confirmed by the court a while ago. After Palestine joined the Rome Statute, so if there are any violations that occurred in Gaza, it will apply to the Israeli armed forces.
In a situation like that, I think many people around the world want the same thing. They want peace. But for Israel, there are hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, so the sort of pressure by Israelis on their military to get those people back will be very intense. For people in Gaza, they've been trapped in a very small piece of land for a very long time, probably in breach of international law there too, in terms of how Israel's behaved. So, I mean, to my mind, this makes any kind of peace almost impossible. There doesn't seem to be any room for negotiation here. Unfortunately, this is the problem.
For the moment, your analysis is perfectly correct. And the reason why I'm saying so is the following. As long as parties to a conflict believe that they can, through military means, reach the objectives they want to reach, so long will that armed conflict proceed and go on. We have a similar situation in Ukraine, for that matter. And some people have now totally forgotten about that other war that is also from time to time in the news. So, and as far as as long as that prevails, we will have an armed conflict situation with violations that may occur on both sides, and which makes it impossible to have a ceasefire or any kind of sort of peace negotiations going on. The consequence of that is that people are now calling for a ceasefire are a little bit naive to think that at this point in time, at least, that, you know, the warring factions will stop and start negotiating and so on. Because of the fact that I mentioned, I still think that pursuing the military way in reaching the objectives is the right way at this point in time, which of course may change over time.
One of the comments made by our President, Cyril Ramaphosa, yesterday, he was at the peace summit in Egypt, of course. He obviously pushed for peace, as I think he's right to, despite what you say about it being naive. I think he should still do that. But he also had a call there for nations to stop arming the protagonists in this conflict. And I presume probably we'd first look at the United States. There would be people who may be arming Hamas as well. We need to look at that. Is that also a fair point, that actually he is pointing the finger, not just at Israel, but also at the United States, not just at Hamas, but also at other parties? Is that important?
I don't think the arming of Israel by the United States and maybe other nations are such an important factor in this conflict. what we must take into account that the military might that Hamas now has comes for a substantial part from Iran. So I think he's also maybe, I hope, including in that sort of call Iran and maybe other states. And they play a role, but I think from a military strength point of view, Israel can stand on its own in this type of conflict. So I don't think that it plays such a significant role, the outside sort of persistence that arm the parties to this conflict.
Seems to me that there's certain elements of the contestation or struggle in the Middle East that really do make it unique. I mean, every conflict has its own unique features. One of the things that stands out is that for some people, if you listen to the South African discourse, for some people it's a colonial, sort of anti-colonial fight. They see Israel as a sort of colonial power. For some people it's all about a sort of politics. For some people it's all about religion. And I mean, to try and untangle all of those strands which sort of get confused with each other, sometimes they tangle, sometimes they untangle a little bit. It's a very difficult, in Greek mythology they talk about the Gordian knot, a knot that couldn't be untangled. It had to be cut with a sword, so using violence essentially. I mean, there are a lot of elements of that there, aren't there?
Yeah, plenty of them, and that is why it also divides the world, because we have people with different sentiments and different solidarities involved in all of this, and they choose their sides. And that is the consequence of that. There's a lot of division. But we have sort of a fair amount of support internationally and by the international community that the two-state solution is the best way and best option for Palestine and for Israel. And we know, unfortunately, Hamas is not in favor of a two-state solution. So that makes it, from that point of view, also problematic. But let me say that if you cut through all of this and about colonial and apartheid allegations and so on, the basic issue here is the question of land and control over which parts of land and the right to self-determination of Palestine, which is justified. There's no doubt about that. But because of the land issue and the occupied territories, it makes it a very difficult problem by itself. And as long as that sort of remains such a prominent feature of this whole conflict, so long will we not succeed in getting a peaceful solution.
Is there another aspect as well, perhaps, to this, Professor Strydom, which might go right to what you look at as an academic and an expert in international law, is the tension between peace and justice. Often to bring peace, you have to sort of promise everybody that there'll be no consequences for what they did. No one's going to negotiate to go to jail or worse. But to have justice, to have long-term peace, you need justice. So in our case, apartheid was wrong. The way we dealt with it was a truth commission, as problematic and as troublesome as that was, and as unjust as it sometimes was, because so many people were given amnesty. Maybe some shouldn't have, and all the rest. That's how we got around it. I suspect in the Middle East that even if there were to be peace, there would not be justice, which means no long-term peace.
Yeah, that will be sad. If that's going to be one of the outcomes. This issue about justice and peace, it was a long time ago a very important remark by Justice Goldstone, which says that the two run together. And in order to have lasting peace, you must attend to both. So I think that is what is also going on with the war crimes committed in Ukraine at the moment. There's a process that has just been initiated by the General Assembly and the European Council to look into the evidence for potential prosecutions afterwards. The same should happen here, about the conflict we're talking now. The same happened in Rwanda and in Yugoslavia and Sudan and so on. So these are debates that I think should not prevent the two objectives to not to run together, or in some way run together, but they should be attended to, and justice should not be neglected if you want a lasting peace in that part of the world.
Professor Hennie Strydom, thank you. Professor of Public International Law at the University of Johannesburg.